Good, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Griffith. I'm the project manager for NASA's Arctic-Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, which is a 10-year field campaign looking at environmental changes in the high north. This is Denali at Denali National Park, out of the window of NASA's DC-8. And I'm going to talk a bit today about the Airborne campaign that we conducted this summer in this region. Next, please. So this project, the Arctic-Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, or ABOVE, is approaching the question of what are the impacts of rapid environmental change in the Arctic-Boreal region of North America, and what are the consequences both to ecosystems and to society. And we're doing this within this vulnerability framework, where the causes for change, one of the causes, for instance, being the rapid warming in this area. This is a polar view of how much the Arctic has warmed over the past 5 years compared to the mid-20th century climatic average. And it's running about 5 degrees C above the temperature that it really ought to be according to the climate average, and that's really hot. So the Arctic is warming first and fastest on the planet. So it represents a great study site to see how things are happening, and these causes for change are drivers to changes in ecosystems. The increasing rate and severity of fire being one of those. And changes to ecosystems have impacts on ecosystem services. These are the values, the gains that humans depend on, both those who live in the region. So for instance, hunting, subsistence hunting is a big deal in this part of the world, but also other environmental services that the whole planet depends on, like environmental regulation of the stored carbon in forests and in soils. And changes in ecosystem services have consequences to society. This is a group of wildland firefighters from Yukon that came to the Northwest Territories to help combat the fires that were taking place in 2015. And of course, society can make decisions about how to respond to these consequences. And these responses can then impact the causes for change. Next, please. We're doing this experiment with a scaling framework that starts at the ground level, where some of the scientists are even looking at things as small as leaves, but certainly the plot level that is meters to a kilometer in scale, followed by aircraft in the middle of this that can look at changes across a broader part of the landscape and help connect the knowledge that we have from a scattering of sites across the region to what we see from space. And all of that can go into a modeling framework to help us better understand all of the different sources of the data that we're taking in. And I'll show you several examples of the site, the airborne, and the satellite and modeling work that we're doing. Next, please. So this summer we started off down here in Saskatchewan, flew 1,000 kilometers up to Yellowknife, another 1,000 kilometers up to Inuvik, another 1,000 kilometers over to Barrow, back to Fairbanks. Fairbanks and Yellowknife were our primary hubs as we covered about 4 million square kilometers of Canada and Alaska with 10 aircraft with a bunch of different payloads. We had over 200 sorties from April through October, and a whole suite of instruments that I will give you a couple of examples of. I'm not going to have time to talk about every single one of the instruments that was involved. And this is just a range from the DC-8 to a couple of the NASA Gulfstream jets, the B-200, and some of the landscapes that we flew over. And we also had ground sites. These are the places where our investigators were making measurements on the ground to connect what we're observing from aircraft and to what we're observing from satellites. Next, please. And we were covering a range of the changes that are happening. So this green and brown is actually a data product. It's based on the 40 years of Landsat observations, and the green areas show areas where the plant growth has increased over the 40-year time frame, and the brown areas show areas where the plant growth has decreased. So it doesn't mean that the plants are literally brown here. It just means that they're growing at a lower rate. And these white rectangles are the synthetic aperture radar swaths that two of the aircraft and instruments flew. And those are sort of foundational range of covering the different areas that we were studying. And of course, around here, around Yellowknife, there's a lot of browning because of the increase in forest fire through this region. You can see across northern Canada and the North Slope of Alaska that a lot of the tundra areas show increased plant growth over this time frame. A lot of that's because it's warmer in those areas, or the growing season is a little bit longer. And the interior of Alaska has lots of these browning areas that are thought to be some combination of the increase in frequency and severity of forest fires and perhaps water shortages as well. So next, please. So here's one of the study sites southeast of Fairbanks. We have a partnership with the Forest Service where a lot of these sites are being surveyed very meticulously by the Forest Service. This is a little town called Delta Junction, and some examples of this is a L-band synthetic aperture radar, which is particularly good at showing the ground surface and vegetation structure above the ground. We also flew the P-band radar here, which gives us some information about how deep the soil is thawed and how much soil moisture. And a similar radar swath here. Now, we also have, it's a little hard to see them here, but there's a lot of these little strips. And these little strips are from another instrument, called G-Light, that is a small footprint LiDAR and a imaging spectrometer. And the small footprint LiDAR will give us additional information about the vegetation structure. But wait, there's more. We also flew an instrument called Elvis, the laser vegetation and ice sensor, through this region. So we have a combination of radar and LiDAR instruments from aircraft, ground measurements, and ultimately space-based observations that from future satellite missions like NISAR and ISAT-2. Here is another example up on the North Slope of Alaska. We've just zoomed in. This is about 22 kilometers wide of L-band synthetic aperture radar, and you can just see this change in the backscatter that we just encountered there. That's where Goiwahana is standing, and we're about to fly out of it on the north end of it. There you go. So you see the discontinuity there. So that is an area that burned about 10 years ago, an area of tundra that burned about 10 years ago. Go's standing here in this burned area. Now the vegetation has recovered quite a bit, but the radar backscatter looks really different. Even though there's vegetation growing there, it has a different canopy structure. Even if it's only this tall, it still is shaped differently, and the surface has deformed because the permafrost was lost there, and some of the ice in the ground melted, and so there's a change in the surface elevation and the amount of water that's in the soil. And so all these instruments pick up all of those sorts of things. Goes on the ground doing the ground truthing with his grad students. This is the helicopter that brought them and me in. And that's a view out of the window of the helicopter. They spent about a week camping out in this little tent. So, so one of the global implications of change in this region is what's happening with the carbon climate feedback as the surface warms and the thawed layer gets deeper each year, and making more organic carbon available for microbial activity to turn into CO2 and methane. You can see some of Katie Walter Anthony's students here on a frozen lake lighting the methane that is trapped underneath the ice over the winter. And this is a similar lake near Fairbanks in the summertime, where you can just see the methane bubbling up out. This is the bubbles there are coming out of this particular lake. And you can see how, as the ground is thawing, that the trees are leaning over. We call these drunken trees. The organic matter in the soil around the edge of the lake is falling into the lake, where it's contributing to the decomposition and the methane release. You'll note the logo for above has that leaning tree. That's because of these trees here. And finally, this is an imaging spectrometer called Avarice image from the North Slope. It's not from one of these lakes. Those red areas are enhanced methane sources. So that's another one of the airborne remote sensing that we were picking up. Just go ahead and skip this one because I'm about to run out of time. So I just wanted to show that there are large objects that come out of the permafrost, as well as small things like CO2 and methane. This is the front leg bone, the humerus of a mammoth, and these are all mammoth tusks. Next, please. This is another one of our airborne flights. This is out of the DC-8. We're spiraling down over McGrath, this video actually goes all the way down to the plane, getting about 15 feet above the runway and then taking off again. While we were testing this, we're starting to get seasick from watching it, so I just had them freeze it right here. But what this aircraft is doing as it descends, this is the altitude of the aircraft. It's making samples of CO2 in the air, and each one of these little red dots is a firing of a laser from the belly of the aircraft towards the ground. And that laser is actually being used to measure the total amount of carbon dioxide in the air column, the average CO2 concentration in that. And you can see a little depletion in CO2 right close to the surface, and a little enhancement in methane, CO2 being depleted because of the plant growth, plants taking CO2 out of the air, and the methane being enhanced because of decomposition of organic matter in all these wetlands. Fortunately, I'm the last talk of the day, so I can probably have another minute, right, to finish this up. And this is a model of the amount of CO2 at the surface. You're looking down at the North Pole. This is a biosphere model combined with observations of fires from MODIS. It's enhanced CO2 any place where you see the red. CO2 is going up either from fire or because of respiration at night, and it's going down because of photosynthesis during the daytime. So we'll take the data from this aircraft, and also, where's Bear? He was here. There we go. And also another little plane that he was flying around, I don't have any pictures of, to challenge this model to see if the actual measurements that were made in the air, how it matches or doesn't match this model. And that way we can improve the models. Next, please. And we're working with all this in a high-performance computing environment called ADAPT at Goddard. Next, please. So here's a final slide. This is another one of the ground sites measuring CO2 and methane release. This is just outside of Denali National Park, and grad student and one of the.
The exhibit hall is now closed.
The exhibit hall is now closed. And yes, it really does look like that up in the summer. It's a really beautiful, beautiful place to work.
At 9:30.
Is that it?